So today I'm joined on Menopause Mastery by my good friend, Dr. Beverly Yates. Dr. Yates is a licensed doctor of naturopathic medicine. She's also the nation's leader in online type 2 diabetes care. Her virtual practice program and supplements are here to help women and men lower their blood sugar naturally at home without ever having to step foot in a clinic. Dr. Yates is on a mission to help 3 million people heal from type 2 diabetes and prediabetes. And she's helped thousands of people reverse type 2 diabetes. And Dr. Yates is writing a new book on blood sugar. And we're planning on seeing that come out next January. So let's talk about diabetes, prediabetes, and specifically how hormones play a role in that process and why you should be concerned about it. Oh, Dr. Beverly. So, and it's funny because whenever I have these conversations, right? It, people ask me, like, what are people looking at? I'm like, well, if I talk about weight loss, that's going to be very, very popular. And if I talk about, looking younger and that kind of thing, that's really, really popular. But what we're talking about today is actually really, really common and becoming way more common, but isn't popular to talk about. But we need to make it popular to talk about because it is a huge concern. And that's metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, and particularly the unique situation women are in and their risk profile. So I'm so excited to have you here as the expert.
Hey, thank you so much for this invitation. I'm looking forward to our conversation, and I know we're going to help people listening because this is becoming more, I think, on top of mind for the people who are going through these struggles. Let's get to it.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting. I looked up some statistics. So looking ahead, these are some that I found online, and of course they'll vary by research paper. But by this year, prevalence of diabetes in the US is expected to reach like 14.9%. Globally, it's projected to be 1.3 billion people 2050. And then if we look at the prevalence of diabetes and its expected increase, it's expected at like 59.7. Basically, so we see these like massive uptick in diabetes. And I think even more importantly is diabetes is kind of the early form of all the other metabolic damage that can happen that causes heart disease. Like, for example, my dad had his first heart attack at 42 but he was pre-diabetic in that zone. He just hadn't received his diabetes diagnosis yet, but it was the metabolic syndrome driving it. So, like, this is a out of control train.
Yeah, it's a totally out of control train. And so I would encourage anyone listening, don't let the train wreck. Make sure you're tested. I'm always shocked when I find out how infrequently people are tested in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, even their 70s as to whether or not their blood sugar is in a healthy range. So make sure you're getting tested. Don't let your doctor, poo poo you or shine you on. And these tests are inexpensive, but they're fundamental. You need to have the data, the numbers, because otherwise, how do you know if you're at risk? Just like you said here, Dr. Betty, you were talking about your situation with your dad and his health. Many people are walking around, they are ticking time bombs, whether it's for a heart attack, a stroke, other consequences of diabetes. They start to have that vision loss reduction, problems with their kidneys, etc. Maybe a loss of performance for their sex drive, their libido's gone down. Maybe they have erectile dysfunction if they're male. Maybe they have clitoral dysfunction if they're female, or they don't achieve orgasm, because the pelvic floor isn't well nourished with blood. Male or female, this can happen to anyone. Why? Because of these metabolic syndrome, blood sugar related issues. The works literally are gummed up, so to speak. The blood doesn't flow as readily, pleasure is not achieved, and this can really impact people's relationships and their mood, and they have no idea this is all tied to blood sugar.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack in what you just said. First off, I got to ask this question because it makes me crazy because I have my own opinion about this. When you get your blood work done, right? When should it be done? Should you
When? Do you mean time of
Yeah,
day?
yeah, like fasting, right? Fasting
Yeah,
fasting
fasting is ideal, especially for blood sugar and certainly for thyroid health. You want your your blood tested in the morning, certainly no later than 9 a.m. I would say ideally in terms of most people's chronometers and circadian rhythm, 7 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m., but really no later than 9. So you really get that snapshot. So if it's blood sugar and you're looking at literally at your fasting blood sugar numbers, your morning blood sugar numbers, you have to be in a fasted state. At least 8 hours between the last time you ate, ideally more. If you follow my work, I'm a big fan of 3 to 5 hours before bedtime is when you eat dinner. So let's say at 6 p.m. If you go to get your blood work done the next day, like at 7 a.m., that's 13 hours. That's plenty of time. Now, you are really in a fasted state. There's no fooling around with that. The same is true if you want to look at cholesterol in your blood. You need to be in a fasted state. We need to see what the snapshot is after you've had a chance with that beautiful opportunity overnight to sleep and then have the blood sugar reset if you are healthy. If you're not healthy, you're going to find it out because if that blood sugar number is too high, now you've got trouble. Now that's a snapshot in time. That A1C number lets you know what you were like in terms of the average amount of extra glucose, perhaps that was in your bloodstream, your extra blood sugar, glucose, same word. Um, and that gives you a snapshot over the last 3 months or so because your bone marrow puts out brand new red blood cells every day, and you have a complete turnover of the red blood cells in your blood every 90 days. So checking that quarterly, if you're really paying attention to your A1C, is the right cadence.
Yeah, because I see it all the time, and I know my clinicians in my clinic and on the telemedicine side, we get a lot of people that are like, "No, my doctor checked it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because I had, had something to eat around 10." I'm like, "Okay, that's not fasted." It's really hard to get good data. That's boo. Boo, boo, boo. Just they do
Boo.
that because 'cause they're lazy and they know they got a hold of you and they can get you to get something done, but it is not accurate to really understand what's going on. And so I think fast is really important because I know just talking to particularly men, I'm not going to pick on men, but let's be real. They'll be like, "Oh, I don't have blood sugar." I'm like, "When was the last time you saw a doctor?" 10 years ago. I'm like, "Well,
We
yeah.
love men. They're
Yeah,
so
I didn't have
interesting. But
gray hair
yes.
back then either, right?" Like, so does that make me not have gray hair? Like, okay, just because you don't look at it doesn't mean it's not real, right?
Right, right, right. It's really funny where the magical thinking comes in. People have this snapshot in their head and they don't realize that we are living beings and therefore our health has a snapshot too. We have to update the snapshots.
Yeah, but you brought up some really important measures. And I think it's, because a lot of times we may not be clearly understanding what's happening inside the body, but like if you're a man and you're having erectile dysfunction and performance issues, that is not a testosterone deficiency, that's a blood flow deficiency. And as women, if you were able to achieve orgasm and pleasure and things like that, that can also be a sign of basically metabolic syndrome in motion. So you talked a little bit about gumming up the system, but what's the real mechanism that's going on here?
Hey,
Really
I'm so
get it.
glad you asked. It's funny. I was reviewing the manuscript for my upcoming book, and this is one of the things we dive into, right? Or online program. So it's called Glycation, spelled Glycation. And in the process of glycation, here's what happens. Your blood sugar is going through your bloodstream, right? So I'm going to call blood sugar glucose so we don't get confused here. Glucose is going through your bloodstream. Insulin receptors sit on the cell wall. Insulin receptors grab up that glucose, bring it inside the cell, and make it available for energy. That is the healthy scenario. Any other scenario is not going to be quite so healthy. So, in the case of the person who has metabolic syndrome, who's become more insulin resistant, this often is the case for women as they enter their menopausal time, for men in andropause, etc. What happens is that process of insulin sensitivity, where insulin receptors bringing the glucose inside the cell, has become less effective, less efficient, resistant, right? That's why we talk about insulin resistance. Okay, now keep that picture clearly in mind. What happens in this case of glycation is when your body is overwhelmed, when it has too much glucose, too much blood sugar in this bloodstream at any given time, your body's making more insulin to go meet that demand. This is tricky. If this is a chronic situation, not a one off, like let's say you had a lollipop for some reason and you do that once a year, that's a one off. If every day you are severely stressed, because stress hormone cortisol releases more blood sugar. If every day you've had poor sleep the night before, that means you missed that opportunity to reset your blood sugar. If your meal timing is horrendous, if the foods you're eating are causing your blood sugar to spike, whether they're junky foods or healthy ones you don't have a healthy response to, right? Both can be true. You're not exercising. This leaves you much more vulnerable to what I'm going to describe as glycation. That means then that your extra excess blood sugar, and I just painted 5 distinct scenarios in which your blood sugar can be elevated above a healthy range. Your body is now unable to deal with all of that excess and it's trying to find a way to put it into storage. But before that extra blood sugar gets to storage, i.e., is belly fat or liver fat, what happens is that extra glucose, that extra blood sugar is in the blood, it starts to attach to proteins, more commonly sometimes fats or lipids, cholesterol in the blood. This creates these really big molecules Glycation is a process of stickiness. And it's this stickiness that leads to the things that become heart attacks, strokes, impaired vision, erectile dysfunction, clitoral dysfunction, pelvic floor issues, a lack of pleasure, hangry behavior, moods, anxiety, depression, a whole host of things unfurls from this basic process of glycation. Think of it as things being sticky. And we all know if you spill water, it's very easy to clean up. If you spill syrup or something sticky, something sweet, it's sticky. The same kind of thing is happening in your blood. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, it's basically maple syrup sticking to everything and trying to clean it up, you can,
Yeah.
and just smear, and then stuff sticks to it,
And then
like
here come the
here on
ants,
the
so
floor.
yeah.
I mean, seriously, like, that's the mechanism, and I think, I think the thing is our body is so incredibly resilient when you get right down to it, and it can take an extraordinary amount of, like, metabolic abuse, and I think the thing that was very clear to me, particularly about my dad's health, was, again, he didn't get his diabetes diagnosis until his late 50s, really, or mid-50s, and but the hallmarks of it were so much earlier that this was going on, but his was heart disease, and 1 out of 2 people won't survive their first heart attack, and I look at that and I go, "Okay, so if people have cardiovascular history and all these other things in their family, that means they probably also have this kind of going on genetically, like, we can be slightly more at risk, but this is mostly an epigenetic thing. This is mostly how we live our life. This is, food and exercise and all those other things."
Right, it is. So when we talk about epigenetics, that's the environmental push that causes whatever, deck of cards you were dealt via your genes to express. And so some of us are far more vulnerable to these things than others, right? That's why I often say we're not equally vulnerable to everything. That's why people in a family who maybe eat the same foods, and particularly see this with children, they're going through the same lifestyle, the same emotional environment, et cetera. And you'll see some of the kids are just doing fine with their health, and there might be one or two children who are struggling, right? Same environment, same food, similar, not identical genes. So it's just really interesting to watch that play out in people's lives. And so, for the work that you do, the work that I do, we're here to try to help people untangle these things because there are people who have heart attacks seemingly out of the blue who are doing otherwise healthy things, but it turns out genetically, usually they had a very unhealthy cholesterol predisposition profile and it caught up with them, right? And cholesterol, I don't want to make cholesterol the enemy here. If we could just take a moment to explain. Cholesterol is necessary. It is the fundamental building block for our sex hormones, for instance. It is where your DHEA and your testosterone, your estrogen, progesterone come from. It is the substrate you want. You actually don't want to get rid of all of your cholesterol. Bad idea. On the other side of it, what we care about is whether or not we're inflamed. Inflammation is what makes all of this a problem. So glycation, where things are sticky, and then if you're in a state of inflammation, is where it will then cause the problems that lead to the heart attacks, the strokes, the various kinds of dysfunction, whether it's clitoral or um, penile, etc. You just need to know what's going on. And sometimes looking at it from that point of view, I'd say most of the time, not all the time, for root causes is invaluable. And a lot of times the labs that could do that deeper assessment are not ordered. And I never understand why, especially if somebody comes to your clinic and tells you they've got a family history of diabetes, of heart disease, of strokes, of cancer, of anything in the metabolic world, hypertension, like people need to know. Like let's take the mystery out of this. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that points to a bigger problem with the medical system, whereas basically, I was telling somebody earlier today on a webinar that, the thing most commonly looked at in a medical visit is what insurance you have. Because the conversation revolves around the CPT codes and the coding that they can do to get reimbursed, and what the cookbook says is the mode of treatment. So essentially, you have to show signs of disease and identifiable disease before we look for disease, which means the train again has totally left the station and we've got a problem. Whereas most of these tests, even if insurance didn't cover it, are relatively inexpensive, especially if you kind of shop around or your clinician shops around, because I know you and I use a lot of the same labs and they're not expensive. But the thing that drives me most crazy is that these people, most of the people out here that are probably listening, don't even get the conversation. Don't even
Yeah.
get to have the opportunity to say yes or no, I want to look at that.
Absolutely, and I think it's good for people to be, um, clear about their own role for advocating for their health and make sure their clinician is on the same page. I would much rather work with someone who's proactive and who cares about this, or maybe they just got that wake up call. Like one of the biggest clusters of people that I've worked with recently has been people who just found out that they have prediabetes, they have type 2 diabetes, or maybe a relative got diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, right, which is type 3 diabetes. And now they are motivated to figure out if they're on that track, on that train, is it headed for them or not? Because, you know, who wants to lose body parts? Who wants gangrene? Nobody, right? Who wants to go blind? Who wants to wind up on dialysis? If you can avoid that, why not? But first, you have to know, is something going on that's a problem, or are you actually okay?
Absolutely. Now, menopause obviously has a complex role here, right? So,
Y-
because there's an association with increased risk for diabetes, and I think that's the reason why a lot of women might be like, "Oh, we're talking about my husband here, or my partner, my friend, my brother, my whatever." But actually, these statistics were interesting to me. So, early menopause. So, the woman that goes through menopause before age 40, for whatever reason, has a 32% higher risk of type 2 diabetes compared to the women who hit their 50s, right? Before they had menopause. And basically, if you have a shorter reproductive span, meaning that the time that you were cycling is shorter, that actually increases your risk. And I was surprised by that data. I mean, I knew that there was risks there, right? But that it was that significant. 32% is pretty big. And they actually even did some studies looking at the hot flashes, night sweats, the vasomotor symptoms. And this one was even more shocking to me. One of the studies said they were 50% more likely to be at risk of diabetes if they have vasomotor symptoms. Isn't that wild?
Yeah. Now, to me, that totally makes sense, right? So let's pick this one apart.
Yeah.
You think about it, these vasomotor symptoms, the body, it's not trying to make women crazy, but it's so uncomfortable. But it also means she's perceiving those uncomfortable hot flashes, which my aunt used to tell me, she called them her own personal summer. So, ladies, if you want to
Mhm.
smile, think about it that way, your own personal summer. Um, you know, it's miserable. It's a stressful experience, especially if this is also robbing you of your precious sleep. Oh my gosh, what a 1-2 punch. So in that, you're releasing what when you're stressed? Cortisol. So of course your blood sugar is going up in the background, even though you're not out there eating candy, you're not having milkshakes in the middle of the night, you know what I'm saying? You're not pounding down the ice cream. And I think that's part of today's mystery around this because there's a lot of people showing up with diabetes diagnosis who aren't necessarily fitting that stereotype where, some people at least feel totally okay to stigmatize diabetics and to do all the judging, the blaming and shaming, which by the way are not healing. And certainly if they were, no one would have it. Given the numbers, we know that's not an effective approach, right? There's a lot of ways to get into blood sugar trouble, and they are all pretty much silent.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I mean, I know that I see a lot of patients and clients that come through our telemedicine or clinic, and they are doing a lot of the right things. They're eating well. Yeah, do they occasionally go have a glass of wine and all those things? Like they're eating well, but they're still their blood sugar's running high
Yeah.
and they're looking at it and I've had many break down and start crying, go, I swear I'm not eating poorly. And I think you're right that there's a stigma, and especially the medical community is very often very judgmental about. But like you pointed out, if you're stressed and your cortisol is high, which is going to be part of the menopause process with the loss of sex hormones, you will see an elevated cortisol, and then you add the sleep problems that usually go along with that. Blood sugar is going to be right on board, and I think even more insidiously, with the loss of estrogen and the metabolic effect, we see an increase in visceral fat, so the fat underneath the muscle, and inflammation alone because of loss of those hormones. And just exercising and eating less does not show to change that for women. Full stop. Full stop. We've
We'll
studied
talk.
people, so when your trainer says it, he doesn't know jack. He is uninformed. So the reality is we have a bunch of things that are happening to us that are very unique to women that men have the same metabolic effect. Not that they don't carry their own risks, but we have significant ones, and those 2 are big ones.
They're big ones. And I think that there's just so much confusion about that. So I salute you for bringing that point forward. As I like to say, women are not small men.
No. No, we aren't. And that's why I'm such an advocate for hormone replacement therapy, that women have that conversation and have a practitioner that will actually help them navigate that, because there are metabolic effects to these hormones. It's not
Yeah.
just about your libido or your hot flashes. And so, I think that's really, really important. So we talked a little bit about the stress chemistry. We talked a little bit about the sleep. What specifically do you see, since you've been working with so many thousands, I would assume probably a lot of women, what about exercise? Because I see two very big extremes, and then, some things in the middle. What do you see? Obviously, lack of exercise is going to be concerning, but I also see some that might be over exercising.
Yeah, you do see extremes, right? So in this work, I see people who aren't exercising but want to. Often the impeding factors are either they just have that odd fatigue that plagues people with diabetes. They're just exhausted. The thought of getting up and out and up, and it's not necessarily a thyroid problem, it's actually a blood sugar issue. That all of that extra blood sugar, extra glucose represents potential energy, but it's not accessible to that person, right? And so usually that's a mitochondrial support issue. The other side of this that I see that goes on with people who aren't exercising, that they're in pain, that they're in severe chronic pain. It's not been fixed, and they are unable to do often full body exercises. Sometimes they can do upper body or some variation of that, but sometimes right now what they need, it could be a hip replacement, it could be a knee replacement, it could be something to do with the discs in their spine. There's any number of things that keep people from really exercising, despite the fact that they know they should and that they want to. They're highly motivated. They may even have a history of plenty of exercise. They're not someone who just hates it for the sake of hating it. Um, and I think it's important to meet people where they are. The good news is with the things that I've come to, because my patients have forced me to be a better doctor over the years. So thank you, patients, and now, clients through telehealth is like, look, let's meet you where you're at. If you're not able to exercise, let's do the other things. So in those 5 lifestyle steps that make the difference for blood sugar control, we're going to just have to take exercise and potentially strength training off the table. As much as I personally love them, I'm a lifelong athlete. I'm still doing strength training now. I also realize it's not always the right step for someone. So therefore, we've had to really focus in on nutrition, meal timing, stress, sleep to get at least 2 of those remaining 4 of the 5 put together so people can get a hold of that blood sugar and, get onto the healthy blood sugar train and off of the unhealthy blood sugar train. That's just a
Yeah.
real thing. Now, there are people who overdo it. I don't see as many of them. I do notice that when people are younger in their 30s or 40s, they might absolutely just pound themselves out. That's usually, though, actually, Dr. Betty, what I've seen. I'd love to hear what you've seen in the context of people trying to lose weight and assuming exercise is the only way they can do it. And they'll work out at the higher end, the middle to the higher end of aerobic into the anaerobic range. I mean, their heart is thumping in their chest, it's heaving and a rocking, right? And in that vigorous exercise, they often don't spend enough time in recovery. So they're not sleeping well. They go to bed too late, get up too early. They may also at the same time have this perception that if they do more, they're going to burn more calories. What they don't understand, especially as women, is that they're also going to raise cortisol because it's such an extreme level of exercise. And what have we been saying? Extra cortisol raises your blood sugar. You're absolutely going in the wrong direction if that's really your goal, either for weight control, weight maintenance, or for weight loss. So it's an interesting dance to figure out who you're working with?
Yeah. Yeah, I know you're right. Yeah, because you will basically turn up cortisol, and then your body's gonna go, "Okay, awesome. I'm gonna go make glucose out of other forms of fuel, which is not gonna be your fat. It is gonna be the proteins and muscle tissue of your body." So yeah, so it's two extremes, but I'm so glad you brought up. I wanna go back to your conversation about that you had potential energy out in the bloodstream. And this is the way I think about it, in case people are thinking about it. Like, you're at a gas station, you got a car. You can either use, let's say you got dual engine, this doesn't exist, but we're using it for an example. I can use regular gas or I can use diesel, which would be fat. Right. Both of those, they've got the spigot on full and they're being poured into the street, neither of which are getting into your car, which is your engine. Right? You're going to get glycation, you're going to get older and all this other stuff, but your engine is starving. So yes, when people, that's the one thing that I also hate is you hear it in the medical community a lot. People be like, "Oh, they just can't stop eating," or whatever. I'm like, "Of course they can't. They're starving. Their cells, every single cell is starving. Your
That's right.
body's giving you the message." And it,
That's right.
it it also tells you to slow down. It also tells
Yeah.
you to, like, lack of all of those things, because it can't, right? So we have to work with that. Ladies, if you're noticing more fine lines and wrinkles, it's not just about aging, it's about the loss of estrogen. And that affects our skin structure, making it drier, thinner, less firm. But here's the great news: I've created Bias Mastery Cream to help. This luxurious bioidentical estrogen cream supports your natural hydration and elasticity. It's packed with nourishing oils like olive, jojoba, aloe, and coconut, so it feels amazing and helps soften those lines and bring back that healthy glow. I've been using it, and let me tell you, my skin has never looked or felt better. It's smoother, more radiant, and those little cracks and creases are way less noticeable. If you're ready to give your skin some extra love, check out Buy Est Mastery on the Metabolic Blueprint website. And that's metabolicblueprint.com/, Buy Est Mastery. That's BIEST Mastery, Mastery. And your face will thank you.
The food noise that people are struggling with, all these various drugs, the GLP-1s, etc., are addressing this people can't stop eating or the imbalance. They don't say this on the commercials because I think it would confuse people. Well, they don't talk about leptin and ghrelin. Ghrelin, when you're hungry, your hunger signals, right? Ghrelin sounds like the word growling. Ghrelin is spelled Grelin. I'm spelling it out because I know some people like to research stuff, so spell it correctly. You're not going to get it from the pronunciation. And, when you're hungry, that's great because you can tell it's time to eat. And leptin, Leptin, is the one that tells you to stop. You are satiated, you're satisfied, you're full. And if you don't sleep well, or if you are severely or chronically stressed, leptin and ghrelin will be out of balance, which is unfair. You'll become overly hungry, you won't feel satisfied when you eat, and you're going to be dragged. Your body's gonna want you to eat the very things that will make it all worse. Usually it's gonna be high calorie foods that are high in the simple carbs, not the complex carbs, resistant starch, or it'll make you want high calorie, savory, umami food. Either way, it's too much fuel. It's not getting into you, just like you said with that wonderful analogy about the two kinds of gasoline and the engine and the person starving. They're still starving. And many people in medical professional don't they don't remember the physiology and biochemistry classes we took, I'm not sure, but they don't seem to grasp this basic concept. It's not like people are trying to fail or to sabotage their own health success. This is a genuine desire that they're feeling because there's this profound imbalance in the background that's shoving them in a certain direction. It's
Yeah.
not a willpower conversation. I wish, because for a lot of people, they're really stubborn. They could tap into willpower all day long. It's not that simple.
Yeah, no, yeah, anybody that's ever gone on a diet that I'm air quoting here has incredible willpower. That's not really the problem at all. So you alluded to kind of 5 things that somebody could really do to help support their, blood sugar naturally,
Yeah.
right? Because I
Right.
think that's the other thing too is you stated it, I know I've seen it clinically, you've done it with tens of thousands of people, is diabetes is reversible, right? Diabetes is
Right. Two
reversible in
diabetes,
many
three
and most.
diabetes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, type 2, absolutely. And especially the earlier you get kind of on the train to fix it, but that's the other thing is a lot of times it's like, "Oh, I'm diabetic, can't do anything about it." Like, no, you can't, right? So you said kind of exercise, obviously, caveats to that. What are the other ones? Because we ran through them quickly, but I wanna make sure we give them their fair due.
Sure, sure. So I recently had the joy of working with a client who has had type 2 diabetes now for over 25 years. And when she first came, she was so exhausted and fatigued and just super tired, was feeling unwell, feeling depressed, and she wanted to be able to enjoy the rest of her years and make them the best of her years, right? And in her case, having been on this journey for so long, she was like, "Boy, is this crazy or can I do something?" So as we worked together, it became clear that she needed mitochondrial support, right? And her nutrition absolutely needed some support. But first, we had to give the woman some energy because without energy, it's hard to focus and to make good choices. You're just going to hit the easy button. And if the easy button is junk, then junk is going to win. So, junk food, this is why it's so prevalent. So, in her case, we worked on the mitochondrial energy support with the supplements. And the next thing we did was look at nutrition. She then, because she got energized and felt well enough to get literally up off the couch, she went back to the gym and she hired a personal trainer and she got into that wonderful upward spiral of positive behavior reinforcement. I see you smiling so beautifully. You know exactly what I'm saying, right? And it's such a joy, it's such a privilege and honor to work with people because when they grab the horns, now they're in charge, right? They're empowered. They're the ones, they totally understand. They're the ones who can make the difference for their own health. They get to be the hero of this healing journey. And in this case for her, We went on from the supplements to get her started, the kick-started situation, the nutrition. Then the next thing we looked at was mealtime. And what we discovered was she had a pattern of eating her meals. Some of the meals were probably a little less than what she really needed, so she'd snack. And this was another place where she might make unhealthy choices because, again, it was easy to get. And if we're honest, at least here in the US, it's much easier to get junky snacks than healthy ones. You got to really work to get the healthy stuff, right?
Mhm.
So once she started to eat in full meals and stopped snacking, right? So she's got her energy back, overall nutrition had improved, stopped snacking, eating in full meals, right? So the steps are nutrition, meal timing. Then she looked at her stress and her sleep. She'd had a sleep issue, but to her credit, she realized it was pretty stable. She looked at some things that were enjoyable for life or pleasurable and some things that were annoying. So she got that in balance. She went on to the exercise part and strength training with the trainer, right? So now we've got nutrition, we've got meal timing, we've got sleep, stress, and then exercise/strength training. Those are the 5 steps of what I've bundled up to call the Yates protocol. And in this is the 5 things that are most sensitive for blood sugar control. And the good news about all 5 lifestyle steps is that these are things you actually can control and take charge of rather than just be at the whims of whatever else is going on. You don't have to be perfect. My big motto with everyone I work with is progress, not perfection.
Yeah.
Progress. We celebrate our wins and we don't worry about our mistakes or the things that are out of our hands, you know? And so in that process with menopause, the thing to think about is the hormonal shifts that are natural and really, frankly, necessary. Um, in those changes, how we manage that moment is important. And even if it's years later, it's not too late. But do please get help. If anyone listening to this is struggling, get help because it's really hard to Google around or to look at Instagram or TikTok and get all the pieces all by yourself. Plus, you have to be able to assess lab testing or whatever is the appropriate part of your set of data, of your set of biological information to know what's appropriate for you. We really are individuals, even twins, triplets, quadruplets. It's fascinating to see how much we are individuals. We really are.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you said that because I was talking, like I said earlier this morning on a webinar, and there was 2 things I was like what I called the stink test, right? So my stink test is, does it stink of truth or does it stink of that doesn't make sense, right? Because science is logical, right? Nature is actually quite logical, right? We don't get these very nonsensical things happening in nature. And so, we look at it and yes, menopause is a natural state, but of course, living significantly past it is not a natural state for humans. And the idea that your hormones are totally safe and awesome, and we can give you really high amounts of synthetic ones as birth control and all that stuff, magically at 50, like dun dun dun, your hormones are going to kill you, right? That defies logic, right? Because those hormones help our body actually maintain youth. And on the other side of that, being told that you have these metabolic changes that can never be fixed, even though it was diet and lifestyle and other things, stress and all these other things that played into it, that doesn't pass the stink test, right? The stink test says, hey, this is logical. We can make changes. And so I think it's so important for people to know that and see that.
Yeah. It is important to know that and to see that. And thankfully, there have been larger studies and more recent studies that showed flaws in prior studies that scared a lot of people off, especially people who could recommend these things, like, say,
Mhm.
doctors or nurse practitioners. So now, we know better. It's time to do better. We have to make sure that we're doing what makes sense for us at this age and stage, whatever it may be. When you think about the teenage years and puberty, as we enter the hormonal shifts and the reproductive window, both as girls and boys in that transition, you look at what's going on and you think about it. A lot of times we can observe with preteens as they become teenagers, sometimes kids will chub up a little bit. They'll put on 5, 10, 15 pounds, right? That insulin resistance that often precedes the clear changes that are part of puberty, they're fueling up, folks. Then they hit the reproductive window, and if it's a healthy child, more than likely, metabolically healthy, more than likely they'll lose that chubbiness, like you'll see their little cheeks puff out like little chipmunks. It's
Mhm.
adorable. And you see the
Yeah.
shift, if that's your own child or other people's children, you've absolutely seen this, or maybe you experienced it, you remembered it for yourself. As we leave that reproductive window, it's almost like Mother Nature is saying, hey, I'm just gonna give you a little more for the road.
Yeah,
A
especially as a
kind of
woman.
insulin resistance, right? And back in history, for most cultures, if not all, food supply was uncertain. People absolutely had a period in their culture where they would feast and they would famine. It was a natural thing because the weather, nature enforced this. There's nothing new about that, but how we live now is what's new, and that has changed it. Plus, let's be fair here, Dr. Betty. The crap that's in the air, the food, the water, that is new. That's man-made stuff that, it's part of it, and I think it contributes, and for some of us really exacerbates our tendency towards insulin resistance, where in a prior era we probably wouldn't have had that. And I'm not trying to make the past all like with a soft gauze, rosy glow. No, there were some real horrors there, but I do think these issues around insulin resistance would have been different because we didn't have so many strange chemicals in our air, food, and water.
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to bring up a study, and this is not specific around diabetes, but I was shocked by this study. So they were looking at natural disasters, particularly flooding and things that occur from a natural disaster. And these have occurred. They were looking at death and disease incident post floods, right? So what happens when things flood? So all the sewer systems flood, the water systems flood. So all these things that we have, all these complex ways to try to control from sanitation often get kind of commingled and made a problem. So they were showing increased risk of cancer, not surprising, heart attack, diabetes, like, so it's so you look at that and you go, "Why?" Well, it's like this toxin load post, natural disaster radically went up, right? And that it was way outpacing in this area compared to another area that was highly comparable. And so I think that's just one more, finger pointing to toxins and other things that play a
Yeah,
role in our health
absolutely.
and well-being, for sure.
Absolutely, that's a great point you make. And if you look at communities that are poisoned because of, maybe it's a manufacturing process that's around them or something that's been dumped into a local river where their water supply comes from, their aquifers are messed up, whatever,
Mhm.
stuff in the air. Maybe they live right by a major port or a place where diesel trucks aggregate. It's like, oh, and you see those communities, you absolutely see this increase. It has to be in response to what's in the water, the toxic particulate matter in the air, all the things, right? Like, and so, but people in those communities will often be blamed for their illnesses. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Give me a break. Come on now. Where is the science in that? That judging, that blaming, that shaming, the stigma. It is so unhelpful. It's
Yeah.
not accurate either. It's
N
lazy.
No, because it's those social determinants of health, basically,
Yep.
the environment in which you live in, how impoverished or not, those things play into your health and well-being more than your actual health care,
Yep.
right? So
Yeah.
and yes, you're right, the medical system definitely points the finger and puts blame on that in a way that never should happen, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then the food industry makes food overly satisfying, overly tasty. It has blown up your pleasure and reward centers, and then they blame you when you eat too much. And I'm like, well, you guys are making money off that. Give me a break.
Yeah, like, you think of, like, what is it? The, hot super hot, whatever not flavored Doritos, like, or whatever it is, whatever product, like, once, like, somebody has one of those, they're not gonna just stop at one, right? And it's
That's the
not
whole
gonna
point.
actually taste that great. Truly, truly, it's
Yeah.
the chemicals in it that turn on those centers in your brain and get you go light up.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Nobody that listens to Menopause Mastery does anything like that. We just know.
Especially if you're driving around with the kids or something, and maybe they've got a bag of those very suspicious chips.
Yes, exactly. Exactly, exactly. All right, well, Dr. Beverly, I want you to share with our listeners some of your resources so they can find you and follow you, and I know you've got an ebook you wanna share. What's in this fabulous ebook?
Sure, sure. So I'm happy to share with your audience an ebook where we talk about more things related to blood sugar and to data, to monitoring, right? We go over the value of why you want to use what's called a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. These are simple things. They can either be gotten via prescription or now finally we can get them over the counter here in the US. Yay, we caught up with the rest of the world. Think of it as like a thermometer, like you use a thermometer to determine if you have a fever or not, maybe to track ovulation, things like that. So a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, something you're going to put right on the back of your arm, very easy, very simple. Get the data on your smartphone, and then this way you will know what's going on with your blood sugar. I highly recommend that people check at least a 2-week period, 14 days. Ideally, really commit and do it for 3 months, because then you'll really see what your blood sugars is happy about and what it's not so happy about. Um, And in the ebook, I put in there 3 different very specific, people, their experience with using a CGM and how it helps you course correct. Because there could be some things you're taking out of your healthy lifestyle because you thought it harmed your blood sugar, and then you realize it was actually okay for me, I'm fine, I was worried about the wrong thing. And there's other things that maybe you're doing that you think of healthy that are generically healthy, it was on a list somewhere or whatever, and you find out it's not healthy for you. So please enjoy that ebook. Other places to connect with me, you're welcome to go to my website, www.dr, like the abbreviation for doctor, Beverly, Beverly, Yates, Yates.com. You can connect with me on my YouTube channel. I'm having great fun with that. That's so much fun. All kinds of fun videos. I just uploaded one right before you and I got on here because you were on your webinar this morning. I'm getting the YouTube going and just trying to reach with people and give them real information. You know, my background is an MIT engineer working in Silicon Valley. I've always loved science and math. I'm a fan of facts, and I feel like people should take charge and be completely able to advocate for their own health because you're the one who's got to live with it at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know?
Yeah, that's why we get along so well. We both have nerd on both sides, nerd on medicine and they're nerd on tech.
Totally, totally. We are good friends for a reason.
That's right, that's right. And so, yes, I highly recommend you guys download the CGM book because it is super telling. Because sometimes you're taking foods out of your diet or you think this food is not okay for you, and it actually is, and then vice versa. And I do. I've worn one off and on for about 4 years now, and yeah, it's very, very telling,
Yeah.
very helpful for helping you kind of do your own best advocate care for yourself.
Yep, yep. Especially if you're wondering what's going on overnight. Because I tell you, for some of us, nighttime is not the best time. All that resetting and restoration that should happen when you're asleep, and if your blood sugar is carrying on,
Mm-mm.
not good.
Not good, not good. And it might be the reason why you're getting hot sweats. It may have nothing to do with your hormones at all,
Yeah,
right?
that's interesting, right? And do we ever hear that? Nope.
Nope. Nope. So I highly recommend it. Well, Dr. Beverly, thank you so much for being on Menopause Mastery. This has been fabulous. Love you.
This is wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for your invitation. I'm always happy to talk with you. I appreciate your work and admire you. Friends, please follow Dr. Betty everywhere you can find her work, you know, and share it because she really cares that we're well. And her focus on women and women's health and making sure we're thriving, especially at that transitional moment of menopause and perimenopause, we want to salute that and have spread more goodness in the world. So please follow all the things she's doing.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Beverly. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Menopause Mastery. And we'll be back next week. And you guys have a healthy and happy week.